YHUH, we just thank you and praise you for blessing us with these days of counting. Abba, thank you for watching over us and protecting us and keeping your mighty hand upon us. Thank you for your words and your letters, and thank you for your Ruach HaKodesh to shine your beautiful language upon us. Abba, send your messengers to Eric and your Ruach and help him to continue to expand in the understanding of what you've shared with him unto us. We just thank you for the beauty of your language. Thank you for this time of healing, this time of counting, and this time of proclaiming your wonderful name. We just thank you for your Yeshua, our salvation, and all the words that you have placed upon us. In your precious name, we ask these things to give you all the honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. So here it is. This is May 18th of 2025, right in the middle of the time of the counting of the 7 weeks of Shavuot. We're talking about the letter Tet, and this is the study of the Psalm 119. I just had put up the notes for the last 2 weeks plus this week, and I believe Nicholas has put them in the chat if anybody wants those. And today, hopefully, I'll get to Psalm 91. I'll explain the reason for that in a bit, but that should be the last two pages of the notes today. The concept of Tet is a bit varied. I heard someone say once that Tet was a snake, that's evil, and Tet is the one letter that's not included in any of the words of the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20. So that's because it was an evil letter, and so it was kicked out. I happen to disagree. That's somebody's perspective, that's their point of view, but I have a different point of view about that. First of all, Tet is not a snake. Tet can be drawn as a picture of a snake, and that is in particular if you have a modern letter shape. Here, I'll draw it like this. So you could kind of picture this being the head of a snake. I kind of see that, well, there's a fang maybe in the head, and then it curls around. There would be the tail. So it's kind of like when the moon is eclipsed, or the sun is eclipsed by the moon, and what they call it, the Ouroboros, or the light snake eating its own tail. That's a kind of a motif. And you could say, well, what that's a picture of? And it's like, regardless of why whoever designed the modern letters drew it that way, in your own imagination, you can kind of see that in the orthography, the shape of the letter. On the eriktology class back in 2011, I had mentioned Tet being something like a sword and a shield. So you could picture that as like, well, that's a sharp spike, like a sword sort of implement, and then the wrap around there's kind of a shield, sort of offense and defense. The letter Zion is a weapon, and it means to be adorned, and it also means to be adorned by weapons. The letter Zadi is a weapon in that it's a fish hook. So the two letters that are actually the weapons are the Zion and the Zadi, and they both happen to line up with the seventh position, meaning Zion is the seventh letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, and there's 7 days in the week, so that's, you could say, well, the Zion is like the Shabbat, the Sabbath day, in that it's the end of the package of 7, and it's the one that's set apart by itself. So it's the Zion drawn as an axe, or sometimes they say it's like a sword. It's that which cuts off. It's also the tool which does the cutting off, or as Mashiach, the one who is cut off. So each letter like that starts getting complicated. Aleph, one, singular, silent, oneness, echadness, the Almighty, the one beyond description, the infinite, the immaterial. That's kind of a vast but simple concept. Bet, kind of the opposite of that. It's tangible, it exists, it can be looked at, pointed to, it can be described. It's the opposite of Aleph. But it doesn't mean it's antagonistic to, just in description. If Aleph is immaterial, Bet is material. Aleph can't be described, Bet is that which is describable. Aleph can't be seen, we might say invisible or beyond the ability to view. Bet is visible. You can look at it, walk around it, identify it, label it, see it from all sorts of directions. So if you run down the list of letters, they start getting more complicated. It's almost like you start with the trunk of a tree. Of course, you could start with the invisible roots. Maybe the roots that you can't see are the more like the Aleph, and the trunk that you see standing up is the Betness. And then it starts branching into the other letters. And as the letters start developing, they start getting into like little twigs and getting more complex and more diversified. So here we are at the 9th letter. And if somebody says, hey, Tet's a snake, and somebody says, no, Tet's a basket. No, Tet's the round rock that's rolled in front of the tomb. Well, it's all those things. I can't remember the name of the site. Oh, well, a friend was telling me about another site where they talk about Paleo-Hebrew, and they might even have the Bible written in Paleo-Hebrew that you can find, but it's very angular. I forget the name of it. Anyway, the point is they have a whole description of something about a gem diamond or something like that. Anyway, but the point is they have a whole list of what the different letters mean, including Tet. And on the what's called the chart with the vertical stripes, what I have there is across the top the 22 letters, and down the side the 22 letters, and then this grid, essentially 22 different ways to see each of the 22 letters. And so I could describe what Tet is just by looking on the chart as seen from the vantage point of all the other letters. It's still just Tet. So if I say, well, Tet is a basket, and it's like, not necessarily. I believe the word Nun Tet has to do with incline. What's incline? Well, that means an incline is a ramp, or I feel inclined. That means I'm disposed towards something. But it's also where we get the word net, N-E-T in English, where you take this, think of a net maybe as being round, a fishing net or some type of retina sort of net, where you throw the net out. And so you're to literally to the action of throwing something out, down, to decline, to lay down. That's all has to do with this letter Tet somehow. It's like, okay, but those are all what Tet has to do with. But what exactly is the letter Tet? So for me to say, well, tet has to do with, I can picture modern Hebrew, especially the sword and the shield concept. And that's inside the het. If I think of the het as being this fenced area, the pasture or the confine, the pestilence, the era, or a kingdom, or a reward, or an exclusive place, a castle, like a country club says members only type of thing, then the Zion is outside the, like the moat around that, or the barbed wire fence to keep people away. So if Zion is a type of weapon, but also Tet's a type of weapon on either side of this wall, you can picture like a castle where you might have some defensive gear, a moat, crocodiles in the moat, barbed wire fence outside, but then inside the castle, you've also got somebody guarding the wall or the police force inside, kind of like the bouncer at a party. So I mentioned back in the eriktology class how the way I picture this is like, well, why would you have this armed situation inside the safe place? Well, then there's that parable where YHUH says some wealthy guy gave a party, sent out invitations, and apparently everybody was supposed to have a certain type of gear, whether it was a shirt or a hat or a badge, or sometimes they put some token around somebody's neck, that identification, proof that you're allowed in. And the guy sees this one fellow who didn't have that, and he says, "Friend, how did you get in here?" And the guy is like, "Well, I came in." And the guy calls for the bouncers to come and take this guy and bind him and pitch him out into the exterior and close the door and lock the door behind him. And it's like, well, why would he do that? I thought it was supposed to be like a party. Why do you have to start acting like that? It's like, well, because if you come into this het, this kingdom, this my father's house kind of concept, there's rules and demands. It's not just a free-for-all. Why else would that guy be pitched out instead of handed a outfit of conformity? Here, you have to wear this if you're in here. Oh, really? Okay. They didn't do that. I mean, the guy wanted in. He believed that he was allowed in. So there's this notion that, well, what does it take to get in? Well, the guy snuck in somehow, or just walked in the open door when somebody else wasn't looking or checking and thought it was an open party, or that's not explained exactly. But the fact is, you can't stay unless you conform. Conform to what? Well, if there was a list of details that you had to do on the outside, that would kind of be in the Zion position. Like, here's the restriction. If you don't do this, this, and this, you're not getting in. Or who is this party being given by? And if you're going to fight and disagree and argue, then just stay away. That's kind of the concept of Zion outside of the het. But then what's this tet inside? Well, you could say, let's say het represented an exclusive arrangement like a marriage. Then you could say, well, the prenuptial agreement might be the Zion outside the het, which is to say, if you don't agree to these terms of relationship, then there's no deal. There's no being together. But once you have agreed and you engage this contract, let's say, relationship of the marriage, what's the tet on the inside? Well, in the ALEF-BEIT song, sealed by tet like a wedding ring is the lyric phrase. Sealed by tet like a wedding ring. Well, a ring is something round, you put it on your finger. but it's a full basket. It's drawn in paleo as a circle with an X in it, or plus, or however you want to look at it, or it's the side view with a meaning whatever is in this capacity, like this goblet is full of wine. So if you have a goblet full of wine, and I say that because that symbolism is used in other stories where somebody makes other people drink of the wine of the cup of their abomination, and then Yahweh grabs the cup when they're done making everybody else and makes them drink it also. What goes around comes around. But that's down at the letter ayin in terms of that scales of balance. But how is that tet? How is that a wedding ring? How is that the round stone rolled in front of the tomb if the het is actually the crypt, especially where Yahushua, hey, Vav Zion, hey, behold this man who's put to the weapon, and then killed and thrown into the het, the tomb, the round rock rolled in front and pinned, held closed by the yod, you might say. What is the common, you might say, the lowest common denominator between all these considerations of what tet is? And then we mentioned last week, there's this concept that there's a verse that says, let emet and chesed be around your neck, and picture like on the lapel of a collar, or that the Celts, men used to wear a thing called a torque, T-O-R-C, and there was a knurl at each end. And so it reminded me of the, even in modern day, if you're a military officer and you'll wear your rank on your collar, that is kind of what looks like was going on with the Celtic torque. And the different, you might say, degrees of development that a man would go through from when he's a young warrior wearing a certain type of looking torque, and then an officer or somebody who's an official with more responsibility or more significant place in the society, they'd have embellished torques. You could say, well, that was a picture of who they are and what they're about. If a person's wearing a certain type of hat or wearing a certain type of badge, it was the same kind of thing, only all they had was this torque symbolism. And if you have emet and chesed about your neck, around your neck, what it says in the Proverbs is that it won't fail you. Well, what is that supposed to mean? And what has that got to do with the tet? Well, if tet is something which goes around, pictured as a basket, or pictured like a snake, or pictured like this round stone rolled in front of the tomb, as I mentioned before, the Stan Tenen from the Miru group, I was talking to him one time. He didn't see these things necessarily in the letters, but he saw the letters as his own particular study. But he said regarding the letters, what if you had a suitcase that was handed down from generations, and it had stickers all of it, and it had been going to these and those places, so you might have labels from its travels. And then one day somebody says, hey, what's in the suitcase? And it's like, it was a holy suitcase. It was specially regarded, but yeah, but what's in it? Nobody thought to open it up because they just had a regard of what it was. And that's the way he saw what was going on with the Hebrew letters, and his study of what's in the letters, or what do the letters represent. It's kind of this concept, well, there's something in each one of these. Well, that's kind of like the letter tet. If the letter tet is a basket, and it's a full basket, then you could say, well, what's the basket full of? See, now that's another way to look at it. One is that it's just a basket, or it's something round. But if the basket is not just the basket, but the basket's actually full, well, what's it full of? Or the fact that it's full. See, now these are the little branches, like I was saying, that if each letter starts getting a little bit here and there and branching out into the little twigs, and then the leaves and the fruit that's on the tree, then as we have a limited amount of time here to talk about each letter, I've got to pick one branch and follow it out to the twig and the leaf and the fruit in order to describe it. Or maybe I can get a couple of them thrown in. But the idea of tet-ness, tet, the Hebrew word, ness, the English suffix, well, that's like this Heblish, this blending, tet-ness, then like aleph-ness and bet-ness and that type of a thing, is to say, we're looking at Psalms 119 in particular. So what did David do with that? If David had this sense of tet, and then he chose these 8 sentences in Psalm 119 in order to express it, is he going to be just pointing at the letter tet? It doesn't seem to be what he's doing in this chapter. What he's doing is taking the frame of mind of each letter and then expressing something from that frame of mind. And that's what I've been trying to follow each week. If you can track with that, hopefully that comes through. But what that means, like with the letter het, is like, we're not just talking about, hey, letter het's a fence or a fenced area. But it's like, well, if you had access to the fenced area, what do you have access to? What is the fenced area? Yeah, that's identifying it. But if you are the one who gets into the het, where are you now? What's your world? What's your world view? And if you think, well, het is the number 8, well, it's the 8th letter. It's not the number 8. Shemin or Shemini is the number 8. And because each letter, the way the Hebrew language is built, it's said there's 3-letter verb roots. Well, you can also look at 2 letters, and you can look at the individual letter, but that means every word basically is a 3-letter construct. And sometimes the second letter is the same as the third letter. So, for example, the word het lamed or het lamed lamed, almost the same. But if you're spelling the letters of the Aleph-Bet, Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei, Bet is spelled Bet Yod Tav, Gimel is Gimel Mem Lamed, Dalet is Dalet Lamed Tav. So what I'm saying is that you can, with 3 letters, you can spell each one of the words. Then there's also looking at the letters in sequence. So if it starts with Aleph as self-referential, I could look at Aleph-Bet Gimel as a word concept, or I could take Aleph as a prefix and then look at Bet Gimel Dalet. And then look at Gimel Dalet Hey, and then Dalet Hey Vav, and then Hey Vav Zion, Zion Chet Tet, Chet Tet Yod. And so in looking at that and saying, well, what does that word spell? It kind of gives you a sense of what's going on. And because Het Tet Aleph means sin, but it also means to incur guilt because I've sinned, but it also means sin offering. Well, what a sin offering is, it's used as this transposition, transposing my guilt becomes the sin offering's guilt. And so then the sin offering takes my punishment for me, and then I get for myself the innocence of the sin offering, what it had of its own before I traded my guilt for its innocence. And so I become innocent, it becomes guilty, it then gets put to death. That's what a sin offering does. So het, tet, yod, the yod suffix makes it my personal. That's just the spelling of the word, het, tet, yod. And it's like, yeah, but if I look at Hey Vav Zion and say, that's Yahusha, behold this man, Hey Vav Zion. Hey, like Hine is actually the word behold, not just hey, but hey means the, but it's kind of like enlightening, pointing to. Vav is not man, but Vav is the masculine suffix, and Vav is a connector. Zion, well, that's a weapon. It means to be adorned by weapon, but Zion Hey means this. Zion Hey Hey means to identify. So the Zion ALEF-TAV means this. So I'm just saying the subject matter of the letters is Hey Vav Zion is illuminating, pointing to this man. And for Pilate then to say the words, behold this man, ecce homo in Latin. Hine et ishu would be Hebrew. Hine, behold, Zion ALEF-TAV. ALEF-TAV is to identify and this man. So what I'm saying is that I'm not just arbitrarily making up subject matter of what to look at. It's in the words spelled with the letters. And did David see that? Could David see Yahushua Mashiach being put to the weapon in the letters? I'm not sure. I've tried to look, and I don't know if he knew that. He saw something, certainly, because that's what Psalm 119 is about. But whether he sees that, I don't really know. I'm trying to figure out what is he saying by looking at what he's saying and saying, what perspective would David have had in order to write these words? And then I could say, well, what does the letter Tet have to do with a sin offering? Full basket. Well, if Chet's an offense of exclusion, it's not the altar. It's not. I could just say, well, outside the fence, the place of the Zion, was the place of the red heifer sacrifice. So if somebody had been in touch with the dead, they were unclean and they couldn't come into the tabernacle area, the Mishkan. Yeah, but people didn't do that anyway. The priest went in there. Well, if a priest was unclean, he couldn't go. If he'd been outside burying dead bodies, he wasn't allowed in until the ashes of the red heifer mixed with water were put on him. And was that like some kind of soap? I mean, they use ashes to make lye, to make the cleansing agent of soap to clean somebody. Did he scrub down and wash his hands? I mean, is that what was going on? Again, some of these things, we don't know what they did exactly, or I don't know. And it's like, is it ceremonial? Was it ritual? Or was it actual wash your hands and get the germs of the dead bodies off you so that you can go into the Mishkan and not get everybody else contaminated or sick? But the wash basin was inside the Mishkan, Mem Nun, not necessarily outside. But they're picture types of a pattern. So I could say Yahusha being sacrificed to decontaminate those who were touching something dead, or let's just say metaphorically, frolicking with death, loving the darkness instead of the light. Then his sacrifice outside, he was crucified outside the wall, the gate, the fence of Jerusalem. That fits. That's where the red heifer sacrifice was done. And if he did that to decontaminate those who would choose life, then inside the chet is a place of life. Well, then what's this tet inside the chet of the decision to choose life? Full basket. Sealed by tet like a wedding ring. Then see, now I can apply these pictures of the pattern and then in my own mind find a resolve to say, well, then that's like if you choose life, you say, well, but I don't deserve life. Yeah, but of course I don't deserve life. I frolicked with death. I was in my ignorance and my sin, but because of his sacrifice. Now, Pesach, Chet Tet Yod, I've said, lines up with Pesach being of the Mishkan pattern. And Pesach is not the red heifer sacrifice. And the red heifer sacrifice was not a sin offering. Neither was Pesach a sin offering. Sin offering is something else, but sin offering does fit with the description of the letters Het, Tet, Yod. But I can say it's a secret code. It's not all about exact definitions. It's about the pictures telling this story and me getting the sense of what's going on. So, and I'm saying this in particular about this set of group area of letters and pictures, but this is the same way of reading any of the words in the entire language and throughout the entire rest of the alphabet. If we do the study, this is what goes on in trying to make sense of who is Yahuwah, what did he say, what does he mean, and what am I supposed to do about it? How am I supposed to behave? How am I supposed to think? How am I supposed to speak and retain a consciousness, or project my consciousness as an energy into the universe, you could say, based on what? Based on the status, the fire within me, the glow projected from me, as it were. We talked about the Beatitudes last week, and at Matthew chapter 5, and YHUH said right at the end of the Beatitudes, he says, you guys that are listening, that I'm telling you this is the way it works, you guys are the light of the world. What? I thought he was the light of the world. No, we are the light of the world if we synchronize, get on board with his ruach, his mind, his heart, his identity. So again, this is another bit of the branching of everything. And he also said, you're the salt of the earth. If the salt has no savor, it's still good for something. He said, it's kind of translated in English, it's good for nothing except to be thrown in the streets and walked on. It's like, well, that's of great value if you live in the snow and if you have slippery ice and you throw the salt on the pavement so you don't slip, your car doesn't slide, you don't fall down when you're walking in the winter. It's still really good for something. Well, so how is this? You're the light of the world. He gives the whole list of Beatitudes and saying, you guys are the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Who? You guys? Us guys? What does that mean? Well, go back and look at the pattern. For Moshe to be at the end of his life talking in the whole book of Deuteronomy is essentially his last oratory, speaking to the children of Israel. And he says, I put before you life and death, blessing and cursing, and I urge you to choose life. Choose life. It's volitional. Well, so I see that is right there at Zion and Het. If Zion is a weapon, then that's like the place of death. And if Het is this other realm with Yahweh's name, like the four colors of embroidery, blue, purple, red, white, gold thread on the Mishkan door. Yeah, but I thought the Mishkan fence represented the grave. That should be a place of death. And it's like, see, but again, it's the picture types. It's the kingdom of Yahuwah, the kingdom of life. Yeah, it also was fit in as a place of the crypt. Yeshua was thrown in there in order to give us life. I mean, I could rationalize it like that. But again, I'm just trying to describe this thing, not to be frustrating, but to say you have to be resilient. You have to be willing to just move around with seeing what these different things are. But in order to identify what the tet is, I've got to be able to identify with what the het is coming right out of the Zion, because you got Zion, het, tet. There's a 3-letter base, and it's like each one is in reference to the other and followed by the yod. And it's like, you can't just look at the individual letter. You got to look at the 2 letters, het, tet, tet, yod. Yod's a hand that grabs, like the artist's hand or the contractor, the builder, the artisan's hand, but it's also the strong hand. Kaf is the open hand, whether it's cupped or whether it's fingers, it's lines. I've seen things that people have written over the time of years that the two are almost blended together, like somebody is not making a distinction, or maybe they understand a different distinction. So what I'm trying to describe is the way I picture the yod is this grabbing, powerful hand based on the other definitions of what yod means, and kaf is the open or the cupped hand, covering hand, sheltering hands or lines of instruction hand, a giving. And those come after the tet. So what's the tet? Sealed by tet like a wedding ring. Well, what's a sealed? Well, a seal, if some, let's say some sort of magistrate or a notary has a seal, a stamp of ink, or like back in the olden days, they would pour wax and then stick an emblem in it, and that's like official. And every time Yahuwah says Nam Yahweh, it's translated the word of the Lord. N-A-M, Nun Aleph Mem. Nam means to declare or to speak, or thus spake, or so declares. It's an utterance of kind of like an executive order of Yahweh. And then so I pictured that one graphic of a red wax ring with Nam Yahweh written in it, and then the letters around it in gold, as if this was the empirical seal. That in and of itself is essentially kind of like the tet by itself. Yeah, it's round, but what it means is this is 100% valid, authentic, real. It exists. Well, that's inside the het, because outside the het is the place of death where things are confused or dark or don't exist really, or in other words, again, I'm having to make distinctions of how am I going to see this and what does it really mean, or what's it trying to tell me if I'm looking at the 22 letters as this encrypted message, which is the fractal skeleton, you might say, the fractal code of the entire universe, and that everything becomes more and more and more complex. I've mentioned before the analogy that if you are the consciousness of Aleph and you say, hey, I want to go buy something at the store. That's your desire. That's your ALEF-BEIT, which means desire. And so you say, well, I got to go to the store. So you identify your desire. That's your bet. You're the Aleph. You hop in a camel or a gimel or a car and you drive and you decide where you're going to go. I'm going to turn right or left, and look at the map. Hey, here's where the store is, down the road over here. So you're dalliting, you're navigating to where the identified place you you make the connection by going there. Zion, you get to the store, you stop, you go into Het, the store, you get your grocery bag, and you load it up. And then when you pay for it at the counter, now it's yours. You've yoded. This is my stuff because I paid for it. So I can, if I look at that, there's those 10 letters there. That's another way of seeing the string of letters, is that's what you do to become the owner of something that wasn't yours and now it is. Well, that's kind of the wedding ring. That's kind of like Yahweh saying, everything in here is mine. I own it. This is my kingdom, my jurisdiction, and I'm the Lord who says what's what, and who you don't argue. In here, you don't argue. You want to argue, you're out. You don't want to do what I say, you're out. You don't want to wear the clothes I say to wear, you're out. And so it's like, then Yeshua says, hey, or the book of Romans say, just believe and you can have eternal life. Whoo, just believe. And then so you enter in and Yeshua says, hey, you guys believe, right? Yeah, we call you Lord. We do miracles in your name, cast out devils in your name. He says, I don't know you. Get out of here. Whoa, but we believe. Get out. I don't know you. It's like there's this troublesome mixed message that I find to be troublesome. And so then you've got, wait a minute, we're doing miracles in your name. We're casting out devils in your name, and yet you don't know us? Rather than just only being troublesome, this is compounded troublesome, because then it makes you say, well, then how does stuff work? There was a movie many years ago called The Exorcist. I didn't watch it, but from what I understand, it was some Catholic priest whose job is the exorciser, the exorcist. And if somebody's tormented by being possessed or oppressed or whatever it is by demons, this guy comes and he throws holy water and he says some prayers and he holds up a cross. And in other words, the film showed that based on other people's real life experiences, there's a protocol, there's a method, there's a regimen. Do this list: 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. You sprinkle holy water, say a prayer, say some words in Latin, and hold up a cross, a crucifix, and then the demon has to leave. Is that the way it works? Is that the way it works? It what? Well, remember, if the tet looks like a sword and a shield, that's kind of spiritual warfare. That's this one branch that we can take in looking at a tet. Spiritual warfare against the snake. What? The snake is in the garden? Well, is the tet inside the het, kind of like the serpent in the Garden of Eden fame, arguing or trying to lie to Adam and Hua and get them to betray their confidence that Elohim had entrusted to them? Is that what the tet is? Is that what's going on? Well, if the tet is spiritual warfare, how do you conduct that if you're inside the kingdom and conduct it successfully in that, hey, we're kicking out demons in your name, and yet YHUH still says, I don't know you? Were they in his kingdom or not? If they're outside the kingdom trying to do spiritual warfare, then there's that one gospel story where I think it was, if I recall, this what's called the 7 sons of Shiva. Well, who does it matter what they were the sons of? There's these 7 brothers. Well, because the word Shiva means the number 7. So is the guy named Shiva, like somebody's name is, George or Bob or Jim or Joe? Is his name was Shiva? Well, Shiva means 7. So maybe he's the guy who had 7 sons. And so maybe his name was, these are the 7 sons of the guy we named Shiva because he had 7 sons. Yet that it might work that way. Or maybe he happened to be named, hey, 7, and he had 7 sons. Either way, as the gospel story goes, these guys were saying to somebody possessed by devils, in the name of Jesus, whom Peter and Paul are talking about, we bind you, devil, and kick you out. And then some kind of devil responded through the voice of the one possessed and saying, hey, I know Peter and I know Paul and I know Jesus, but who are you? And then it leapt up and just beat the bejeebers out of those 7 guys and left them with torn clothes and bloody and screaming and running. Now, just to look on the surface of that Bible story and say, how does this stuff work? Can you just claim, hey, that guy's successful, so I'm going to say, riding on his coattails, as it were, by the name of that authority that he invokes, I'm claiming the authority that blah, blah. Is that invoking Nam Yahweh? Is that invoking the sword and shield? Is that invoking the seal of the emperor that you have no authority to invoke? Will it work? And if it doesn't work, you might be in big trouble, just like that Bible story. It might have been in the book of Acts. I don't recall. I think it was probably then. The Acts of the Apostles talk about different exploits and shenanigans they found themselves involved with. Is that tet? In other words, can I look at the tet inside the het as being, once you get in here, there's ways to do stuff. Is that the full basket? It doesn't sound like a full basket. That just looks like there's a protocol. There's now a legal regimen of right and wrong. This is how you do it. Sealed by tet like a wedding ring would mean once you sign up and are in, you now have what you might call perks and benefits, but you also have responsibilities and obligations, things you must do, because that's what you signed up for. Like with the prenuptial agreement, you might say, it's like, hey, I promise to take out the trash and feed the dog if you promise to mow the lawn and wash the car or do the dishes. Or is that what this is? Well, so I'm sitting here trying to say there's all this different stuff about what tet could be seen as, but when we were looking at het, I was saying het can be seen as, who is Yahuwah and what did he say? Then if I'm outside the het and I choose life and choose to enter, I see blue, purple, red, white as Yod, He, Vav, He, and enter the het, and now I'm in his dominion, then I can see the full basket of who he is and what he's about, his heart, his ruach, his way of doing things is the derek. His ruach is driving force. The word ruach can be mind, will, disposition, spirit, wind. I could look at the ruach of Elohim as this is the way it's. Remember, Yeshua said, another metaphorical sort of Bible story, he says, you can see the effect of the wind, see the trees moving, and you can maybe hear it, but you can't see where it's coming from, it's where it's going. But so somehow from the inside of the het, there should be a different perspective, a different sense, like if you're thrown in the tomb and the rock is rolled shut, now you're inside. See, now the perspective on the other side of the tet is, I'm inside this place. And if it's a tomb, you're there forever. Or in Yahushua's case, 3 days and 3 nights before that opened up and he was out again. But picture that. I'm just trying to give you this sense that the tet view is inside the het. It's completely different than the Zion or the other 6 letters. And once you're inside, you're sealed. You're claimed as owned by Yahuwah, like the wedding ring, like the grocery bag that is bought and paid for, like the one whose sins and crimes have been absolved, paid for, atoned for. And you're now of a different disposition. You're mentally, spiritually, emotionally free and clear, and now you're able to engage this whole other world inside the het. So that special badge or uniform you might be wearing is that consciousness of being his. So the fellow at the party that wasn't wearing the clothes, was he like, hey, I don't know whose party this is. I just heard there was a party and some free food, and so I'm here to have that. And it's like, get out of here. Or for Yahushua to walk up and say, I don't know you, then the tet-ness has something to do with knowing and being known. Well, that's the word yada. Yod Dalet Ayin literally means to have this experiential oneness, an experiential getting together of knowing. Well, the first place yada was used, I believe, is in Genesis, where Adam knew his wife Hua and she became pregnant. So that's the meaning of the word yada, that knowing. And as we mentioned last week, there was a place where Yahuwah said of Abraham, I have loved him, and so therefore I've seen that he will command, Zadivav is the word, not just teach, but command his children and his household to, you might say, keep all the commands of Yahuwah. But that the point is, I have loved him. That's the word dalit ayin, or yod dalit ayin, which is yada, which is, that's not the word love. The word is of love is ahava. There's a few other words that can mean love, but not yada. Yada is to know. Well, why did the translators choose to say that yada meant to love? There's something about love and knowing, experiencing. Yeah, but that's tetness then. That full basket, what's the basket, what's in the basket, and what's the fullness? And then Yahusha, I believe, made it clear as to what the heart of the matter is when in describing himself and his relationship with his Father. He said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And I've heard people argue the point that Jesus is the Father, or he's one with the Father, or because of the Trinity, the Christian concept of the Trinity, there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three different people, but they're all just one, that essentially he is the Father. And it's like, I disagree. And I would say the way I see it, in order to disagree, is the fact that the Father is the invisible Aleph. And Moshe said, can I just see you? Can I behold your glory? And he was told, no, it's impossible. No man, no human being, no Adam can see my face. But he put him in the cleft of the rock, put his hand over, blocking Moshe's view. He passed by and declared, he gave words. And then he took his hand away and he says, Moshe, you can see my backside. Now, does that mean he has a physical back? Gimel pei is the word for back, or like wing, or covering, or does he mean, I've heard it said, now this is more of a metaphorical sort of reading into it, that nobody knows what Elohim's going to do. Life just happens. Well, that's like his front view. But once it's happened, once he's passed by, we can say, oh, look, that must have been Elohim. Because look what happened. Oh, that's like seeing his back view. So that's kind of like the allegorical, metaphorical. So you have PRDS, Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod, four ways of reading scripture. Peshat's the surface story. Remez is the allegorical. That would be the allegorical. You don't know what he's going to do, but once he's done it, you can see how that must have been him, and that's what he did. So the question is it possible to see Elohim? Well, if Elohim's the Alephness, by definition, invisible, beyond scope, beyond perception, beyond seeing or touching, but then Yahusha is that Aleph in Bet form. By definition, we can see him, talk to him, look at him, identify him, touch him, engage him. That's like a different dimension. That's the Alephness. This is the Betness. But is it the same? Is it the one? Yahusha said, I only say what I hear my Father saying. Did he hear his Father saying those words? Must have, if that's the only thing he says. And he only does what he sees his Father doing. Now, he then is unique amongst all individual people. He was an individual people. He came in the form Ben Adam, son of Adam, in the construct state of Adam, Ben, Bet Nun Hey is the construction, the word to build, to construct. So Ben Adam, son of Adam, he came in the construct state of the human being, we might call, though legally that's a different word that doesn't mean what we think it means. Does that mean he's the Aleph? If we think of Elohim as the Aleph, and the Aleph is in the Bet form, do we worship the Bet as if it was the Aleph? Why do you make it so difficult? Are we supposed to or not? That's the trouble. That's the problem. Are we supposed to be thinking of him as the Aleph, or think of Aleph as Aleph and thinking of him as the Bet? And then I read close where every time YHUH said, worship my Father and as I do, and my Elohim as I do. You worship my Father and my Elohim. So he put himself in our capacity, distancing himself from Elohim's capacities. He's somewhere in between, and it's very disturbing, which is why we don't know, which is why there's all the conflict. He designed the conflict. But the tetness is, I can say, there's no conflict with anything Elohim ever said. And so therefore, the full basket inside of the Het, the kingdom of Elohim, the full basket is the full scope, the full understanding, the full package, the full reality of Elohim, because his name, 4 colors, blue, purple, red, white, on the Mishkan, labels it as his. Therefore, the full basket inside is what Yeshua is describing. Everything his Father's saying, we say. Everything his Father's doing, we do. Therefore, if our Father in heaven engages in the Moed of Pesach, then we engage in the Moed of Pesach. And if he engages the Hebrew language, then I engage the Hebrew language. And if Yahusha is the chosen emissary in human format sent from heaven, then I'm going to receive him as the chosen emissary in human format sent from heaven, because that's my Father's stuff. Well, everything that's one's stuff is the Shem, name, fame, renown, reputation, and occupation of all your concerns. All your stuff is your Shem. Well, a really interesting thing in Psalms 91 is that in verse 14, which we'll hopefully get to here, is he says, blah, 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 because they know my name. Because, Kaf Yod Ki, Dalet Ayin, Yod Dalet Ayin, he knows, Yada, Shemi, my name. And that's Yahuwah Elohim speaking in verse 14 of Psalms 91. So in reading Psalms 91, it's like, because he knows my name, because he knows my Shem. See, name, what's his name? Jesus, the Almighty, the eye in the sky, the big man upstairs. That's not his name. It kind of goes by those things, but what's his name, fame, renown, reputation, the occupation of all he concerns? Well, that's everything represented by every one of these 22 letters, which includes Sabbath day, his commands, his decrees, his ordinances, his testimonies. I mean, all of his stuff is his Shem. And because he knows my name, because he knows my Shem, well, then it seems like there's a responsibility imposed on us to find out or to get to know what is his Shem. But you can't know that from outside. So then being outside the fence at the place of the Hevav Zion, let's say, or Bet Gimel Dal Hevav, there's no way you can know this stuff unless you're inside. And once you're inside in the Tet realm, in the Tet space, it's purely his stuff. And so therefore, all his stuff should be knowable, should be known. And it's therefore then it's available to us and therefore our responsibility, or is it an obligation? Well, remember, if you sign up, there's certain things which are you have to, you must. This is what you do when you're in here. That's the full basket, but it's also perks and benefits you get to. But if all of a sudden he's to put a demand on the people that come in, what's, oh, hey, back off. I thought this was a free meal, a free ride. Well, if Het Tet Yod represent Pesach of this is the kingdom of life, and he's going to make the way, you put the blood on the doorpost of Pesach, and you come in, he says, this is my people, and if you don't do it, you ain't my people, and you don't even get in. But once you're in here, now you're my people. I claim you, I'm your Elohim, and you're my Ayin Mem Yod, my Ami, my people. Now what do you got to do? Well, remember Pesach, just again looking at the model of the pattern, Pesach was the night at the end of the day of the 14th of the first month. And within just a very short time, it was the beginning, call it the morning of the beginning of the day of the 15th, and that was Chag HaMatzot, the festival of unleavened bread, the feast of unleavened bread. And all the leaven had to be out of your house, and you eat unleavened bread for a week. Well, the word matzah, unleavened bread, also means find out how to do something. Mem Zadi Vav Tav. Mem Zadi Aleph, Mem Zadi Hey means to press or like squeeze out the leaven, but it also means to find out how to do something. And do what? Well, Zadi Vav is the word command. So you could say, right on the heels of Pesach, immediately within the moment that Pesach, the 14th, turns into the 15th, find out how to do what he commanded. Well, what do you make such a big deal about? Hey, slow down. You know, it's like we just stepped in the door. And now you're telling me I got to obey a bunch of rules and laws. That's what it means. So I can say part of this full basketness is exactly do what he said. Find out what he said. Find out what is going on in here where it matters. And if you're listening to the voice of those on the other side of the fence where they say, it doesn't matter. Well, maybe it doesn't matter on the outside where you have to learn what he said and do what he said in order to get in. You got to jump through all these hoops and hurdles in order to get saved. And so the het represents getting saved. Well, maybe that's not a fitting analogy. Because if you knew how to do the stuff outside, how'd his stuff that you can only see from the inside get outside? Well, you hear people talking. Yeshua came walking amongst those of us in darkness. And we're supposed to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So there's a testimony. But is there a demand that people do what he says and obey his laws and on the outside in order to get saved? I don't think that's the way it works. But once you're inside, that's absolutely the way it works. Not to get saved, but once you're inside, you're his people, and you better find out what did he command, what does it mean, and how do you do it, and how do you do that? By listening, Shema, to every word he said. So part of the full basket of the Tet is, what did he say? Nam Yahweh. Okay. I don't need to hear any more of that. I can hear now, I better figure out, what did you say? Well, and that's what this stuff is. And what is his name? That's found by what did he say? Because every word he said is about his Shem, his name, his day, his Moedim. The treasure of his heart is to have his people listening to his voice. We've gone over this numerous times. If the treasure of his heart is that his people would listen to his voice, then when Israel does not listen to his voice, and Israel does not walk in his ways, halakha, the derek, the yashar derek, the straight path, and Israel goes wayward with turning to the right or the left or zigzagging instead of straight and narrow, that really agitates him. So by reading all these various accounts, it looks like what he wants us to do is learn how to hear his voice and have a heart-to-heart relationship, yada him. But you got to do that from the inside. So is the tet a basket, or is the tet a this one friend said that he pictures the father is saying, "Hey, come up and sit on my knee, sit on my lap," and he pictures himself just sitting there and snuggling up into his, just like one might with their grandchild or a little puppy dog, or however you want to picture that. But what I'm saying is, do you have to know Hebrew to do that? No. Do you have to keep the Sabbath day in order to do that? Do you have to learn 613 laws to do that? No. That's kind of a different thing. But it's not a contrary thing. In fact, I kind of see, maybe this is just me, but I kind of see learning his language and learning how to celebrate the Moedim, which is to say, observe the Moedim, keep the Moedim, engage in the festivities of the Moedim with other people, as doing that, sitting on his lap and snuggling up to him. That's what I picture that is. Hey, Carla, where are we at for time?
Where it's time.
It's time?
Yeah, I did warn you.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay. Good thing I checked. It just started to feel like we should stop. Okay. As soon as we get back, I'll look into the what did David say with the letters tet with this in mind, and then try to get into Psalms 91 for the second hour. But